Start recording. Hello there. Thank you for joining me. Let's start with a few basics. Please tell me who you are and what do you do in general.
Yeah, so I'm Logan from Canada, and I am just a student. Technically, I'm actually just a they call general science student, but in practice, I mostly do computer science courses, like theoretical computer science or whatever, but just undergrad, studying in university. And then for hobbies, I mostly just do, and this is what I do, Emacs, and kind of how I found Parcilos. I do writing, like fiction writing. I also do some, I guess, kind of maybe non-fiction writing, sort of similar to you actually. Like I don't post anything, but just more like a short blog that is just thoughts about this. But I don't actually post, so it's not a blog. Just I guess a diary, essay, whatever you want to say. Sometimes I do short little things like that. And then I also do coding for school, obviously, and then note writing for school, and then but also coding for my own little, mostly game development kind of, but very indie. I do it myself. It's mostly a hobby, not like, of course, not really professional. Maybe one day, but I'm not really strongly about whether I will do this or another kind of software.
Okay. So, general science, you said. What is that in broad terms? Because to me, it sounds like it is a little bit of everything, like a little bit of math, a little bit of physics, a little bit of computer science, or is it more focused?
So the general science is like, I think in the past, actually, there was way more people that did, like maybe you've heard the liberal arts degree. It's like, this is the science version of this, right? So they're just like, you can do whatever you like, you can do whatever. So some people, they do a little bit of literally everything. They take one chemistry, one biology, one geology course that kind of just continues off from high school. I guess a lot of people that they were like, I did chemistry, biology, physics, maybe even computers in high school. Then I would like to keep doing these in university. I like that was not necessarily me. I actually had a sort of weird thing where I want to do a very specialized degree, actually in that sort of like a game development. But then just reading more, I was like, I think this is too specialized. I'm not sure. I don't know if I guess like I would want to like hitch myself to this. It seems like these people are extremely kind of passionate. I mean, I was passionate about a lot of things to a certain extent, but just I reconsidered for a bit, and then I like sort of in a little bit panic said to all the universities that I applied to, like, hey, I'm not, because I applied only for mostly this and then some other specialized ones, and then I said, I'm not really sure if I'm ready to do something so specialized, but this was very last minute. It was really a little bit of bad foresight on my part, but only some universities said, or because it was so last minute, oh, you can do a generalized degree, we can switch your thing. So then I just said, okay. But that's why sort of, it's actually a little unorthodox for me to do so many computer science. Usually the general degrees, at least for my university, they say don't do so many, but the assistant dean, I guess, is nice and says you can do whatever you want. And I guess I just, there's other prerequisites in the mainstream computer science I'm not really interested in doing, so.
I see. But I guess the general degree makes sense from a longer term perspective if you plan on doing a second degree, like a master's degree, where now you choose a specialization. I guess that's how it would work.
Yeah. yeah. With that, of course, that kind of stuff for me is something to think about. But yeah.
Hmm. So, how did game development come about? Like, I imagine you started tinkering with that from an earlier age, or did you pick it up at university?
Uh, Not really. I mean, I had there was two high school classes I had that were very like, I thought they were very actually just fun programming classes. Um, it was using some weird kind of like modification of C++ or something, or even C sharp. I don't know. That element was a bit weird, but I mean, it's all really the same. Um, at least that kind of element. But so I don't really remember what they were using, some kind of weird software. I don't really know why, but still I found it very like fun. That was around when there was like very much COVID though, for me. So I felt like that kind of development for me was a little bit disrupted, and it actually took me a little while to be like, okay, coming back to this kind of I took a break, right? And for me, up until that point, it wasn't really natural to take school kind of activities and then put like transform them into maybe hobbies or like off time academic study, I guess. Most of my other hobbies were very much like kind of removed from like school, like or just any sort of kind of serious study or even like programming. I guess because programming is kind of a little bit in its own realm, I think, where it's like, it's like it's very directly connected to like an academic field and like other even more kind of like abstract academic fields like math. But at the same time, there's some people like you can just fool around, right? Whereas, I mean, I know there's some people that make maybe like alternative history videos or something. So I guess you can say, okay, that's the equivalent in like history or something. But in general, like, like my other hobbies were like playing like the drums or something. Like, I know that nowadays there is somebody that does an academic history of drumming or something. Like, there is everything just because things have become so specialized. But in general, you don't really think like, oh, okay, I'm going to move my drumming hobby, like kind of move that into academic study or vice versa, kind of. Not that some people don't find academic study fun, but I think just in general the lines are more distinct. But actually, I think that I wasn't really going to think about games that much, to be honest, if I didn't find sort of like what I was doing in university, like right now, at least the application of it, a little bit dry. I sort of find some of the assignments a little bit like rote and dry very much. So then it's like, oh yeah, but I have developed this skill. And then I remembered, oh my gosh, it was so fun even at the beginner level to make these honestly pretty crappy games when you're first doing it in high school. So I was like, why would I not try to, tinker a bit? I found that also everybody says, I'm sure all the time you hear like, oh, okay, the software that were sort of like very much given as a total package, I guess, seems very exciting at first. But then Microsoft does this, now there's ads in my operating system. We all have to use like, not we all have to, but sort of, with things like Microsoft, right? It's like in a lot of academic or business settings, it's like, here you go, here's the package, here's what you're going to use, the whole Office suite or something like that. And then sometimes, I personally found those ones a bit like, you're given everything at once, and then it's like, where do I begin? Of course, you can use it for simple things. Like, basically, it's just like you use this big Microsoft thing like Notepad or like a org table. But and I mean, in general, I was like, where do I even enter in this on a software level? It's like, I can't go in and edit like, Microsoft Excel to make something. And even the open source, I'm sure you know, like when you're coming and you just know like the basic things, like, how does iteration work? How does recursion work? Like what are variables, like stuff like that. It's like, okay, how do I even like start entering into making software? And even the open source can sometimes feel a bit like this is already like a structure, a pyramid, a big building that has been built. Am I going to come and put a little brick on this? Like it feels a bit whatever. So I didn't even think about all this necessarily consciously, but I think I felt like because of that, it's like, no, I have to start with something myself that it's like I can understand from the ground up. I mean, not necessarily the ground up, like not necessarily from like the OS, like or bits and bytes level to OS or whatever, but at least from like, a source file to this is the program. That's what I needed to do myself, right? And that's, I guess, that actually does relate to some of the topics that I guess I sent you today. And I think maybe even you can find it relatable with, I saw your video, like efficiency and basic powers, or some about, I don't really specifically remember what the title was, but I think it's maybe more similar to like imposter syndrome and then this kind of stuff. I think it's very relevant for many people today because when you think about it in history, I mean, I'm very much generalizing, but often what people do in a sort of professional sense in the past is more like they are given that directly from the people that directly contribute to their economic like way of life, I guess, so to speak. Like, you were taught the traditional method to do your professional career, right? But nowadays in both professional and even non-professional kind of like any sort of thing where it is either an economic field and also building a body of knowledge or a structure itself, sometimes now we enter and it's like there's this thing out there and it's like the building has already been built and it's like sort of I guess your responsibility almost to how am I going to contribute to this or how does it even work can be way more daunting already than that sort of comparison to I guess traditional modes of production or even
because it is a function of complexity, really. Like the more complex something gets, the greater the level of abstraction that has to go into managing it. And of course, the more abstract something is, the more you need to understand in order to deal with it as a single person. So what usually happens is you don't think about the other abstractions. You just think about your specific domain, and you don't try to understand the whole thing, how it works. You only understand the little bit you do, and then you're like, okay, the other levels are for the other people to deal with. Because if you try to understand everything from the ground up, it's so complex that basically you cannot do it.
Yeah, you never get started, and that's kind of the issue. But I think that maybe this is a little more related to our topics. Of course, in some things it's obvious, but in sometimes it is a little bit necessary for maybe not you, but for someone else to know, like, because you are saying, I'm going to become a piece in this puzzle. But if you can't even see the puzzle at all, you don't know where to fit, is almost that kind of idea. And I think that with sometimes this is definitely the case. There is, like, for example, I think, like, even though I have enjoyed sort of the exercise of start from the ground up, do whatever, in general, it is sort of not a waste of time, but less efficient and also less maintainable, I guess, if we use a code example. If I am just rewriting the standard library functions or very equivalent things, right? So it is a little bit like, I mean, I guess this is more a different but related debate of how much time do you spend sort of understanding it, and how much time do you do just getting in on hands-on stuff. And of course, that's kind of a balance for different people, and also depending on the domain, and also depending on the situation, right? But I think that in general, we are. Do you want to move on to like kind of bridge into the other topics that
yeah. But just to
mentioned
say, because I think this is interesting, and then it connects to what you told me about the other topics you want to cover. But I think here, ultimately, you cannot just reinvent everything, because if you think about it, you start on every topic. Let's say you start on the basics of programming. Well, if you really want to go to the basics, eventually you have to go outside programming and talk about logic and talk about mathematics and eventually you will be rediscovering what the first human ever discovered. So of course you have to start somewhere eventually. And I think the way it works in practice is that usually we start with something as a given, which is like, take this, don't ask how it works, just work from this point onwards. And then the kind of person who is really interested into understanding things from first principles, who wants to go in depth, will come back and be like, okay, now let me understand what is happening here. And then they will go deeper into that. But this, of course, what you are now saying, is kind of the confusion / stress-inducing situation we face, I mean, many of us face, where it's like, okay, what do I do in life? Where do I belong? How am I supposed to contribute to this massive structure? Because it's something I don't even comprehend. I cannot even fathom it. So what do I do? And you mentioned these topics in the message you sent me, where it's like, okay, how is it in terms of life opportunities and work outlook? What can we make of tendencies for escapism through storytelling? What is good escapism? What is the bad side of it? That sort of thing. So I think it ties into that. So yeah, please tell me a little bit more about those topics.
Oh yeah, so I think, well, I'm interested in a lot of these topics. I'm not an expert like in either like economics, obviously, because these cover economics. Even like some of the philosophical issues, I'm not an expert on what every sort of philosopher has said. I guess related to what you said, I think it was Hegel. He said, like, if you ask any question, if you actually want the answer to this question, if you expand the scope either this way, you will horizontally. So sort of like I asked a specific question about ladybugs, maybe. And then it's like, why are ladybugs there? And I think it was any why question. And I expand the scope horizontally. So like, why is life, or why is these bugs there? Why is animals there? Why is life there? Eventually, I think those cover, you can do, or that horizontal level, you cover every topic of the natural science if you actually want the answer to the question. And then I think the vertical level, he says, which I think is a little more debatable, is all the topics in philosophy. I'm sure somebody else, like, probably know some Greek said something similar, like way before, but
yeah, maybe.
But it is kind of a true. But I think it's even more like less philosophical than this. I think people can cope with the fact they don't know everything. Like that's always been true. But I think, as you said, it's almost more like, now with how like connected everything is, it's almost like sometimes it feels like you are one person playing a race against the other 7 billion. A little bit, right? It's like, oh, okay, I want to do this, but then somebody has already covered that pothole, or even I don't even know somebody has, and then like a little bit this. And I think it comes, in my eyes, it's a little bit of a generalization, or a big generalization, but in actual life, I think there's really 2 questions, and then from those spawn a lot of other questions. It's like, A, like, how do we survive? and then B, it's like, how do we get what we want? Like, how do we, and then these questions are like, okay, one of the questions that comes after that is like, who is the we? So, right. So this is like kind of very much like super individualism versus it can expand to, oh no, we is one universal humanity, right? And then, if you think maybe the super individualist people might be like, the we is I. How do I get what I want? How do I survive? Is the only question that matters, right? And then other people disagree with this. And then within these questions, if we are going to answer like, well, I think it is a we, really, then maybe it's like, how do we help other people survive? How do we help other people get what we want? Is it not good if somebody else getting what they want prevents the rest of the people from getting what they want, or surviving even? And yeah, I think these are the main questions. So that's why I thought, because the second one is, I think in general it is less important than the first, how do we survive, because the second one is contingent on the first one, obviously.
Sure.
But it is still the second biggest question. So then I think the biggest question from that.
Sorry, just say it could be 8.1, 8.2, or whatever. Like it could be the first question. But like, how do we get what we want to survive? Like it could be that. Even.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think like also in a way, history has kind of been the progression of focusing on the first question to focusing on the second question, right? Like the history of like economic production and things like this. But since that second question is at least I think the second most important question of life, I think the most important sub question of this question is like sort of ideas of like, what should we want? Is it okay to want everything? Is it okay to even make is it okay to even say that we should want things, or is it just any want is equal, right? Like this is kind of like ethics, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's like, even if we say, oh, okay, no, these questions are just not important, really people are actually, they are still like almost asking the questions by just their actions. Like they're negotiating the questions in real life. So I say it's a little better that we at least think about it out loud than just negotiate in real life, and there can be bad consequences. There has been bad consequences. So yeah, to me that is kind of the first thing. And then the storytelling for me is more, this is a little bit more separate and more connected to, I have my own writing, so then I think about like I guess the philosophy of storytelling, right? I guess.
Mm-hmm. But the storytelling here is connected to these questions, and if so, how? Because I'm interested to see the connection here. Because these questions, I agree that they are central. Like if we don't answer these questions, like what are we doing, kind of. And of course, these questions are packed with many other questions which analyze or explain or specialize the general question. So, of course, like how do we survive? What is we? But then, of course, how do we distribute resources? What does it mean to coordinate the distribution of resources? And so on and so forth. So, of course, there are many more specific questions. But specifically with storytelling and with what we said earlier, do you think that the difficulty of answering such broad questions is what eventually creates a tendency to think about something else entirely, like in the form of storytelling, or through storytelling to answer these questions, like imagine an alternative, like a fictional world where you can start things from the ground up, to connect it to what you were telling me earlier, and there figure out the problems? Like, what do you think is the connection there?
Yes, definitely. I think that a story, like we see, like dystopian stories are basically saying, like, for example, you might think you want this, but you definitely don't want this because this is right. That's a very simple example. Like the dystopian writer is basically saying, in real time right now, people are doing actions that say they want this thing, but I think you don't want it. Like basically, right? I think when we think about early storytelling, which I think has what I said, the three main, I guess, points of storytelling in the email, which is there's a conflict and escapism, and then there is like an escapism, like a fantasy, basically, and then there is like lessons. Like the theme, I think, is always like can be actually reduced to a lesson, really. So, and I think like all the early stories you remember have all of these three, and then but there is, you can kind of choose one over the other. And I think even though it's rare, there is almost pure forms where a story is purely basically one of the three. And I think that and I think it's rare that there's people that enjoy just one of the three, but it does happen sometimes. I know my girlfriend got me to watch a movie, and I think she is rare in that she is someone that she doesn't care about conflict in the storytelling. The movie had almost no conflict, which is very, very rare, actually. It's more of a slice of life. So,
sorry, let me ask you here, just to be clear. What do we mean by conflict in this case? Because, of course, conflict, you can define it as, well, violent clashes. That's one type of conflict. But conflict could also be like a difference of opinion. So there is tension, and there are maybe conflicting priorities, conflicting interests, but not necessarily brute force, the use of force.
Oh yeah, so in storytelling, we really just define conflict as there is like at least two individuals, like the protagonist and the antagonist, and they have opposite goals. So these goals can be non-violent, totally. But that causes a conflict of sorts. And it's very rare a story has no conflict. Like, I think it's very difficult. But some of these ones, I think, have a minimum amount, at least, of conflict. And I think conflict is, like, the fundamental. At least, I think, of the ones if you want to, like, learn how to write a good story, basically, the main one they say is conflict is the essential one, actually. Mm-hmm. But this is the actual one that is, I mean, they are all talked about. The theme is also very much, and now I think even fantasy escapist elements are very much talked about. But this is the one that is like very much like the core, both recognizes analytically when you analyze storytelling a motif, and then also like told to be like, this is the main technical thing to focus on. Where, like, what is the conflict in the scene? What is the conflict in the story? How does the conflict develop? How does it change? It's almost like the main analytical lens that people that write a bit more, I guess, consciously, because I know, like, you know, I think there's people, you can tell a great story without sort of dissecting it, right? But at least the people that write a bit more consciously, conflict is the first lens used to be like what, and I think that the conflict lens is because, you know, like this is almost a fundamental facet of reality, right? Mm-hmm. We recognize that on every level, it doesn't mean we'll hate each other, but there's differing goals because people do want differing things, or even on the survival level, right? The resources are consumed. So this is a little bit, whatever. And I guess this kind of idea, this support is in line with some philosophies and not with other philosophies, actually. Like this is a little bit more maybe like a Marxist kind of idea.
You mean like, the conflict?
It's not necessarily. Yeah, it's not necessarily a class, whatever, right? But that's kind of an an easy an easy one, but it's not necessarily that you become like a Machiavellian or something, right? Sometimes by recognizing that fundamentally by having different goals there's conflict, it's like then the question might become, so do we want to go a world where we try to align our goals the most and upfrontly be like, okay, I might have all these goals, but I'm going to put one of these aside because you and I here have the same one, right? And I mean, even using that example, I think Marx is sometimes misread, where it's like, oh, because it's a conflict view of the world, that means like it's sort of that is also like a normative kind of like a prescription, right? But it's really supposed to be like we actually want to kind of minimize the conflict, right? Like to end it. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying like, I'm fully on Marx's side, but I just mean that you don't have to become like and we should maximize the conflict just because it exists in reality, right?
No, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but that is an interesting element actually. One of the reasons I chose that as one of the topics is sometimes I do think, and it kind of, I guess, it doesn't like hurt me, but it kind of like makes me question as a storyteller. Sometimes I do think that because good storytelling is very conflict heavy, and even you see, I know people watch soap operas, and sometimes they're just like endless drummed up conflict, and it's like, I know that one soap opera that I know someone I know watches. It's like it started where it was very much like supposed to show like these are like the middle lower class people in their lives, and it had like a decent amount of conflict to make a show go good. But because they have to make it so often, like they have an episode almost every day, now it's like sort of, even in the conflict, things have become sort of totally stereotyped. So it's like the conflict are so overblown and stuff like that. But I think that the point was not about like, oh, this soap opera has gotten way worse, or even on storytelling level, but maybe too much viewing of this kind of stuff can actually make people like kind of more conflicting in their real lives. That is a question actually to be had. I think that we have actually seen in recent times, especially, that people have been like, people actually do even change their ideas and stuff based on like the stories, right? And there's some people that say like, oh, this is so bad. Like people are too easily influenced, and of course maybe that is true, but I would say that storytelling, since like we know like Gilgamesh and things like this, like at least since that point, but probably before that, it has been like have an effect on how people view the world, right?
Yeah. It has to.
And I see that. Yeah, and I see that more escapist ones, they influence the way that people, like even these three fundamental, like you can't really like say like a story is just purely, like you can't understand a story from me just saying like it has so much conflict. It has so, like you still really don't know what is that story like. But even I think still in these three kind of fundamental bars you can kind of move, it does very much, I think, affect people, even their worldview, and like how people go about living life, right? Especially people that are obviously more like they engage with more stories, I guess.
Of course, the thing is that stories will influence you, I think, in the same way that all stimuli influence you. So, of course, if you are exposed to stories too much, you will have more likely heavier influence from stories than from everyday experiences. And, of course, at some level, everyday experiences are probably internally formulated as a story again. It's some kind of narrative. There is like
exactly.
A beginning, middle, and end. And maybe, depending on how you see it, you are kind of the protagonist, not because you are the center of the play, but because the play unfolds through your eyes.
And I guess maybe this is why I was encouraged to choose this as one of the topics for discussing with you, because actually, I mean, one kind of internal conflict I had a bit, I guess, was that I see that the process of narrativization can make people a little uncontent. And actually, one of the philosophers that I really like is Epicurus. I feel like that I am kind of a very naturally kind of Epicurean person. I have like sort of maybe like wrestled with people a bit who either have very much like what's that word, ascetic views of life, and then on the other end very like kind of indulgent, kind of maybe even sadistic, not like as in there, but in the original form of, do you know the philosopher Marquis de Sade? He said like pleasure is the point of life, and it's almost a sort of aggressive pleasure, right? But I've seen this kind of dichotomy, and it's like I've always been like, oh, you know, I can admit that I like the simple pleasure of a sandwich, but it doesn't have to go much farther than that. It's like that is the best, where it's like you kind of have a little, and then it can quickly return to baseline. Your life doesn't get disrupted by the pursuit of pleasure, and it doesn't turn quickly into pain, really. But I feel like because of some ideas that we've had, this simple conception can't even be said. It's like you have to sort of, it's like this other binary gets set up where it's like asceticism or like a very aggressive pursuit of pleasure. And it's like, if we have, and now we do live in a time of abundance way more than Epicurus' time. Way more.
For sure.
It's like, but it's, for me, it's very simple. It's like, if I can go to the market and, like, to use Epicurus' example, enjoy a piece of cheese, why would I not? Why not? I mean, I don't mean that you should go and buy cheese or whatever. I just mean, like, you know, why not enjoy the thing that you enjoy, but on a very reasonable level? And for me, it's always been like this. But I actually saw that it sometimes is the narrativization element that prevents people from doing this. And then I was like, well, I'm a writer, and my stories aren't like a simple guy goes, gets a piece of cheese. Like, there have been like people have attempted to do stories like this, and it's not very successful, and I think for a good reason. But is it like that we should, I have even thought, even though I love storytelling to a certain point, is the whole project of it like bad? And we should really be like, let's get rid of the story so then we can just like enjoy just kind of our simple lives. Because if they prevent us from that, but it is simple life, is actually the easiest and least destructive thing to achieve in material reality, then maybe stories are even the bad guy. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but you can see honestly the logic. And I've seen how it's like, you know, it's as simple as somebody, but there's another, like, even this is one conception, and then there's another even conception on top of this, where one of the examples that I think is actually seems identical to this, but in some ways is opposite, is if you know around you know the biggest movie of all time. I don't know if it's the biggest anymore, but biggest grossing, you know, like Avatar.
I've heard of it, yeah. So
you don't have to see it.
I watched some parts of it, but I didn't watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's not that important, but the point is, it was kind of a movie where it's like this beautiful jungle planet, right? And the theme of the movie is about like very much like I think a very normal theme nowadays, where it's like kind of I guess like an idea similar to American imperialism comes and takes all the resources and burns everything. And but it wasn't even that. It was when that movie came out, when people saw it in theaters, it was very much, many people came out back into real life and was like, I'm so depressed. And usually it's attributed to the scenery was so beautiful, and now we come back into our concrete jungle, or like kind of wall, everything is a big mall kind of thing. But this one, it seems analogous to how like the storytelling makes us discontent with our lives, but it's kind of a different thing where it's just purely like we have changed our environment so much, and then maybe that sort of natural environment is better for our biological senses or whatever.
Yeah,
but
just to say on this,
it's kind of complicated.
Just to say on this, I think narratives can, of course, be negative in the sense that we want to fulfill the narrative. So if you have a narrative of your own life, then you are anticipating your actions and are like, well, what would the character in the story do for it to make sense for that character, right? So instead of acting in a manner that is consistent with how you feel right now, which of course might contradict how you felt before, you are acting out as a character in a role-playing game. So you are gamifying your experience, and of course now you have to become somebody who you thought is good for whatever reason to be. But of course you develop that thought in a vacuum. It's not in vivo, it was in vitro. It was in a thought experiment that you came up with that role, but in practice that role may not be able to be enacted. That's the one thing. The other thing about Avatar, because that's the other side of it, which of course stories can also effectively place a mirror opposite us, and in juxtaposition we can find that, well, something is wrong here. And we are like, okay, look at this pristine world of the Avatar, and then look at the kind of world we have, where our cities effectively deny us our sky. And of course it's happening that I am outside now doing this. And of course, if you are in a city context, you don't see the sky, literally. Like, you don't know when is the full moon, for example. So basic stuff like that. And then when you compare and contrast that to what you would see in, let's say, the Avatar, you are dejected, and you're like, what am I even doing here? What is happening?
Yeah. So I thought that was definitely interesting, because in general, I always come back to, like, if you can be content, why not be, right? So like if you can't, but at the same time, with that other example, I thought that was a bit different, because I thought, and with some other examples that are shown by storytelling, and dystopic stories and stuff like that, where it's like, the important thing there though is that it's not just like I could be content now, or I am content now, and then the story disrupts my contentedness. It's that the story shows that, you know, as a group, we are moving into a place where everybody is going to be not content. It's kind of, that was one kind of different element. Like, because I thought, like, if you kind of take it to an extreme, and then there's the whole, like, you know, all the jungles are removed and things like this, it's like, yes, this obviously is not good. Everyone, and there is studies that the suicide rate goes up when infrastructure looks a certain way, when there's less sunshine, stuff like this. So it does have a very real effect. So, but it's always this difficult negotiation where the other end of only the fantasy is going to suffice for the individual is not. I think that is a destructive. Or I think a little bit when people fully believe, like the process where people are allowed to fully believe the narrative is kind of, and then like the sort of other factors in materiality get eliminated. And I think this is pretty obvious to people that look out into the world, and we see that certain narratives, definitely not story ones necessarily. I think that's a little less obvious, but story-like ones are used to get people to look away from, I think Orwell said, the first thing is try not to trust the information from your own senses, basically, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm not referencing some conspiracy theory here. I'm saying in the very obvious ways.
No, of course.
And
one obvious way for that would be to have a narrative about what it means to be qualified, a narrative of what it means to be happy, a narrative of what it means to be somebody who is a high achiever. What does it mean to achieve something? Of course, all these come with social expectations, and there is underpinnings to them that are normative, and you ought to do it in a certain way, and if you do it in another way, maybe it doesn't get the recognition it would otherwise get. So of course, it's not just you doing the deed, it's also you doing the deed in a manner that is appropriate for, well, the script, which is the social expectations and how you as a player conform with that role effectively. So that would also be a narrative in that case.
Yeah, and it's I think this narrative capacity is actually one of the, at least from what we know, the fundamental things that make humans different from the rest of animals. I mean, maybe not. Maybe the dolphins are also telling themselves stories or whatever. And definitely one of the movers of human life and history is that we can make other people believe in narratives, basically. And it really is with the general, with this instinct and then also the general social instinct, is is this really a force for good or not? Is actually a big question, I think.
I think
because in this, with the social instinct, it's it actually is at the end of the day the same instinct that makes people polite and stuff like that, and the same one that made people burn witches in the 1700s or whatever, right? And this is kind of the complicated aspect of it, and there is also conflict once again embedded in this this kind of idea, that some people want to promote certain values, and then some people want to promote opposite ones, and some people are against sort of the maybe more authoritarian promotions of values altogether. Anyway, I think maybe we've gone a bit too general. Do you want to try to maybe narrow in on something?
Let me say one thing about this, though, about conflict. Because you might say, you know what, I have good intentions. I want to eliminate conflict in the world. And of course, you know the song from John Lennon, Imagine all the people, and basically there is no property, there is no religion, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, there is nothing to fight for, right? And of course, we just love each other. If you think about this for a second, for this to work, we also have to undo individuality. It's not just a matter of undoing institutions such as property or religion. And there is this Greek myth, to connect it back to stories, of course, it's all stories. There is this Greek myth of Procrustes, and maybe you have heard of the Procrustean bed. So Procrustes is somebody who is a really capable craftsman. And he has this John Lennon view of the world where it's well, we should all be one size. We should all be the same. And of course, you can say, well, if we are all the same, I just need to make one type of clothing, right? If we are all the same, I just need to prepare one dish for everybody to be happy. And so on. There are so many benefits. We don't have to fight of, hey, you didn't put enough salt in my food or whatever, right? We won't have to argue for anything. It will be great. So what Procrustes is doing to enact his master plan of everybody should be equal, everybody should be the same, and we are all happy. He has this bed, and he will take people and force them onto the bed. If they are longer than the proportion of than the size of the bed, he will chop off the excess parts so that they fit onto the bed, right? If they are smaller than the bed, he will stretch out their limbs so that they fit exactly the bed. And basically the moral of the story is that, of course, Procrustes has a good goal in mind. Imagine all the people kind of thing. But for him to actually realize that goal, he has to mutilate and torture people because people owning to their individuality will not fit onto the bed so neatly.
Yeah.
So, of course, in practice, to eliminate conflict, you have to do it via conflict. And it will be of the most totalitarian sort.
Yeah, no, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that this is why I think the analyzing desire is actually an important issue, because of course we at the same time, while we understand we cannot eliminate all conflict, we still of course want to improve the world, I guess. And I think the first question is this kind of general, like, who has the right to go about and sort of by improving the world in anyone's eyes, even if it is almost everyone agrees, it's like you have to conflict with others, you have to change some people's values, you have to whatever. And it's like now I think it's very obvious to us in a different way than, sorry, it's just like usually all the time it's like because these general things that they lay out all these sort of different ideas and then they come together. But when it's obvious to us that many of our desires is not like we came about this ourselves through experience by ourselves individually making kind of conscious decisions. Now the question is that even possible? Is it even really possible that I kind of just say, oh, you know what, I just do love the cheese, and it's I want the cheese because I had the cheese before I smelled it and now I want it? For, I think, animals, it's really easy to say, oh, the bee wants the honey because he just has like been instinctually qualified to want the honey. But for us, it's not. That is not the case, I don't think. And it's obvious now that there's all the time people that want things because somebody else made them want it, and not even somebody they know, right? Like some advertising firm thousands of miles away said, we want people to want this, so you're going to want this. And then eventually they do, is like the thing. And there's even more, I think, malicious forms of this. I think actually advertising it's malicious because of the scale, but actually not necessarily that malicious, like per instance of this happening. But like, if we say like, okay, we know that, we didn't come to these desires like by ourselves, advertising made us do it. It's like, how far does that go? Did any of your desires really come from yourself? Not to muddy the waters like purposefully, but and I don't think you can say, oh yeah, no, like all of our desires are socially constructed because we're just born into the world. Like we didn't choose the world, we're just born into the world. So therefore they're all constructed. So therefore the advertiser making you want something is exactly the same as me hungering for a piece of cheese and then wanting it, right? But it's like, what exactly are the desires? And I do have an opinion. It's not just like a what if. What are the desires that is like, what makes a desire worth pursuing and what makes it worth rejecting is ultimately the question. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, I'm still working out the ideas, but for me, there are structures of certain desires that make them more likely to be worth pursuing. And for me, one of them is, and I think here's me where Epicurus might be a little straw man that he would be against this, but for me, one of them is that it is, and I think maybe you would resonate with this, it is something that can be inhabited as a mode. So I think that many times another reason why we kind of think that products that are advertised is not a true form of desire, or at least one worth pursuing, is because, I mean, I know there's some people that they collected 10,000 Snoopies or something like that, but in general, it's not a sustainable thing that you can enter into the mode of actually keep pursuing desire. We see it's not sustainable because, like, the economy and the planet cannot keep up with fulfilling the desires of pure consumerism, right? If everybody runs 10 cars, this cannot happen, right? And then you can only really, if your actual desire is fulfilled by buying the car, this is why I think it's actually different. Like, if your desire is to really have the car and enjoy it in, like, for hours and hours and hours, I actually see that as different than the person that just wants to buy the car. And there are people that they just want to buy the car. They don't want, their desire is not really to take the car for a drive every weekend, and even if nobody is around, they're going to drive the car. Yeah. I think this is a minority compared to people that want to just buy the car. But for me, buying the car, that is not a mode you can kind of go back into, right? And it's unsustainable. Really, it does come down to almost you can even kind of reduce it to a logistical mechanics.
Which I think is useful to do, actually, because if you frame any question such as this along normative lines, so you say, well, is it good or not? And however you go about answering it, I think fundamentally your answer is correct or incorrect relative to the framework you are using. So if you are viewing it from the perspective of Epicurus, you reach one answer, which is the correct answer. If you are viewing it from the anti-Epicurus perspective, you reach another answer, that sort of thing. Whereas I think you mentioned the word which is key here, unsustainable. And you also mentioned another word which I think is very relevant, the economy. Like you said, the 10 cars, and of course the economy cannot handle that. And I think here we have a mechanism which is inherent to nature. Actually, economy is not really a human invention. Economy exists everywhere in the universe, everywhere. And fundamentally, it's not a matter of what I think. It's a matter of what can the world take. So it's really that. Like, if I can actually buy 10 cars, and if just buying the cars and then selling them is what gives me excitement or whatever, and if that is something that the world can take, meaning that I can keep doing it, and everybody can keep doing it, then of course, in a sense, there is nothing to discuss here from a normative perspective. It's something that can happen. It's something that, well, nature allows it to happen. God allows it to happen, if you want to put it in those terms. And whatever we say it relative to, fundamentally, a narrative that we have, a vantage point that we have, a school of thought that we have. But if you forget about the school of thought and just think in terms of mechanics, in terms of how resources are distributed through transactions, then you see, okay, for as long as that kind of transaction works, there is nothing to say about it. What we can say, and what the dystopic storytellers are doing is, well, imagine this, like picture this reality projected into the future. Now picture this, which I think now is the part of human creativity that allows us to foresee an outcome and not just focus on the mechanics. And then to say, okay, given these mechanics, here is the projection of how things will look like, and do we like that, yes or no?
Yeah, exactly. I think that like sorry yeah, it does come down to like things being in material reality, and that can be analyzed economically or mechanically. And I think but that is sort of maybe a common misunderstanding is that, I mean, maybe throughout the history of philosophy, we've kind of like there's been a separation of like materialists and idealists, right? And I think this does actually just like not just trickle down, but ordinary people that are not necessarily professional philosophers also have similar ideas, right? And then we kind of separate like what is whatever, and then maybe math is something easy to say, okay, it's not really in physical reality, even though we can use it to do calculations about physical reality. Mm-hmm. But I mean, at least me personally, I'm more lying on the side of materialist, and I think like, but that doesn't mean that I think that all the things that is normally thought of as more abstract or idealism, like that they don't exist or are not useful. I think that they're included in material reality. So I think that the projection of the dystopian writer, which is an idea really, and is not happening right now, at least, or sometimes at least. But this is still, I see this in material reality and can be analyzed logistically, even where the story gets distributed, who is it affecting, this kind of thing. And with the ideas of sustainability, though, and how you said that you can analyze these things logistically, and then sort of normativity, which kind of implies ethics, is kind of not really in the picture. I do think a little bit you can say that in the same sense that whether you are sort of, I guess, a moral realist or moral anti-realist, they say. I mean, I hate to bring up these kind of like very like academic philosophy terms, but either way, you can say the thing that we say is in the realm of ethics, that still exists in material reality. Whether you think that these norms can be said objectively, subjectively, whatever, it's still like, I think anybody with common sense can say, okay, there are certain things that we kind of say are in the realm of ethics. And that, I think, has a material reason, actually. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily the most accurate, but even when people go and are like, oh, antiquated morals, like, I know in the Hebrew Bible, it's like no eating shellfish and things like that. It's like, these often came about for a material reason, because eating shellfish or pork was way harder to cook, and then it makes everyone sick, and then whatever. And then even the ones that seem more abstract morally often, and I'm not saying that they're justified, and some of them are very misguided, and some of them should not be applied in the contemporary context. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that what we think of as ethics is meant to interact with logistical, mechanical, material reality. It's meant to manage and interact with that. And if that conception has been lost, it is because things have become over abstracted in a sense, or like we have kind of like got lost in sort of the philosophical weeds and think that this is a totally like separate question, almost like doing a math problem and just totally unrelated from reality. And then actually even math problems, as science develops, the math problems that were once purely mathematical become applicable to reality. So I think in the same way it can work like this. So in that sense, I think that in the way we speak about ethics, there is a case that it is unethical to basically promote in material reality desires that are very unsustainable. So in a sense, you can even say that advertising as it works now is almost unethical, I think. Because it's like, what is it doing mechanically? It's saying to people who might have been content otherwise, you should have these desires which are unsustainable, and then they're going to go out and do it. It's going to become more unsustainable. Logistically, it means that other people cannot fulfill desires that are more sustainable, and those other people that were going to perhaps have desires that are more sustainable and really be fulfilled by them, yes, too, do not. Mm-hmm. And in a way, this is both mechanical and logistical, and also, yes, like in the way we say of it, ethical. Yeah. So I think that I've always been a little bit, even though I sometimes agree with more sort of academic philosophy, but the Hume, you cannot derive an ought from an is. I think that's also kind of the idea you were speaking of with the John Lennon, and then also, why we kind of want to separate, like make clear the descriptive and the normative. But in the way, there is almost a right thing to do based on the material reality. And I think that ethics has always been connected to this. I think that's why it's sort of, there is this bridge that, and it's only when it's like, we get into these like very abstract, like, like categorical imperative kind of ideas that then you have to come in and say, you can't get an ought from it is, like this kind of stuff. Like if we only do things in an a priori kind of sense, right?
Sure. Though, for example, to use the example of the advertiser here, and of course, I agree with you. I don't like advertising. Of course, I don't do clickbait or any of that, for example. But for the sake of the discussion, because of course this is really fun, let's say that advertising is bad. Okay, let's take that at face value. It's immoral, unethical. You're a terrible person if you are an advertiser. Let's say that. Okay.
I don't mean we should punish them, right? Like,
but for the sake of the discussion. Okay, so here is our starting position. Why now, if we want to do the right thing, why should we punish advertisers when we consider that for the advertiser to have a job, there are people who fall for it? So if we want to fix the world, why don't we fix those people? Right? So if you think of the advertiser in this case as some kind of a virus, why not develop antibodies instead of saying, oh, bad virus? You see what I'm trying to say? So even if we grant that something is bad, it still doesn't give us the answer as to what should we do about it. Because, of course, on the one hand, we could say, okay, let's banish advertising from history, no advertising. On the other hand, we could say, okay, let it be, but you, dear friend, be mindful of the tricks that advertisers will do.
No, I definitely think that understanding.
This is, of course, for the sake of the argument. I'm not saying that advertising is always bad. Let's,
I don't even think advertising, like, even in the way we think of it, is always bad. I think that
no, for sure.
Like there needs to be, or maybe not needs, but it might be very efficient for there to be an effective way for people to. Sometimes people actually don't know what exactly they want. They have a very vague conception of what they want. Maybe it's like, I have just. I need something to fix something, but I'm not a mechanic, but I kind of want to fix it myself because I think I can. Okay, I got to look for some product, but I don't know. And, it's very useful. And this is, like, sort of was originally thought as the realm of advertising, right? And I'm not saying all advertisers are bad, should be locked up, or even they're all unethical people or whatever. But just from this understanding, I think we can say that my point was that what is ethical is actually directly tied to what is materially sustainable for fulfilling those two questions that we talked about, to help people survive and then get what we want, and then the first question of that, choosing what we want. And advertising is directly related to that essential second question, which connects to those original two questions, or the third question, which connects to the original two questions. And we can then say, okay, some of the things that we are doing is not making those, not giving good answers to those questions, I guess, or giving answers that can never be really actually answered in reality, I guess. And with that, I think that, yeah, when you actually answer the question, I'm not saying it's an absolute answer or whatever, but from all sides, you can say, okay, in what I do as a sort of, I guess, producer of sorts, so that might be the advertiser. Okay, maybe there's a case. I mean, not that they should all quit their jobs right away, but like there's a case that what I'm doing is not really, at least even I think there is a use of, even if you're like, people really hate hypocrisy now. And of course, I think it's generally bad to be like a liar, hypocrite kind of thing. But I don't think it's bad if somebody, for example, they honestly can't really leave an advertising job or something, but maybe they agree with what I'm saying and are like, I can understand that advertising does have a negative effect in this way, and I'm still going to do it. And I don't think that makes you a hypocrite. I think that makes you understand multiple things, that like, the economy is set up in this way where I cannot just leave my job. Yes, that's fair. And then B, though I correctly understand it, instead of, because I think otherwise you're caught in a scenario where every time, because the information comes, you have to look away because you are trying to fool yourself.
And this is what I was working towards with the previous point, which is fundamentally what we are asking is to protect people from themselves. Because if you say, okay, we shouldn't be doing this thing, but if it happens, somebody will be fooled by it or be led astray or be led to their own calamity or whatever. Fundamentally, we have a more pressing issue here to consider, which is that some people will misuse their capacity to act freely, or what we consider acting freely, and which is to act in a manner that is self-destructing. And of course, we can think of self-destructive, rather. And of course, we can think of it very clearly in the form of a baby. Like the baby, you have to protect it. You put it in an environment that is a controlled environment, because if you leave the baby to its own devices, it will likely harm itself. But then you know that you are taking away some of its potential for freedom. But you do it for a good reason. And then, of course, we come here to this point, which is like, well, should we consider that as well? So it's not just look at the side of what the bad influences are, but also look at the side of the individual who now gets affected by those influences. And can you empower this individual through education maybe, or through other role models or whatever, to be a less prone version of themselves, less prone to this kind of self-destructive propensities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And actually, kind of fittingly, I guess, that like babies is kind of the next avenue I was going to go into. I think here maybe we're gonna get like, yeah, I'll be upfront. This is more like kind of hard opinions of like what I kind of think that's more directly connected to specific things. I think that there is coming to it is this sort of some of these facets have kind of riveted up enough where it is almost, the question becomes, yes, we want to maybe like the idea of like teach a man to fish and he will, be fed for his lifetime, basically, right? Rather than give him a fish kind of idea. It is coming to a point where it's like there is so many forces where the teaching of the man to fish becomes like, that itself is what is threatened, actually. And to use the example of the babies, right? I think that in a sense it is a logistical issue where it's like, for many people, even if they are hungry to be taught like wisdom or whatever you want to say. There is so many forces battling them, and on a logistical level, they are basically doomed. So to use the example of the babies, actually, there's now like I guess there are sort of TV shows made for babies, and then these are not necessarily written like how a storyteller writes a TV show for babies in the past, right? Because I don't think that's necessarily bad, but they are instead made by hundreds of engineers. Some of them are psychological and then some of them are like more technological, but they're basically like they're actually rigorous scientists like and engineers, yeah, but the task of their science is to make the television shows for the babies as addictive as possible. And it's like we can see in this example, it's like clear anybody who says, oh, but the baby can learn wisdom against this is a fool. Like, you wouldn't even take this person seriously.
No.
And I think that we have to have the humility to be like, we have, like, I'm even sometimes lean towards, like, absolute free will. Like, at least philosophically, sometimes. But at the same time, I acknowledge that an individual cannot play against 10,000 other individuals and come out on top. The baby in this scenario is going to be whatever. And I think sometimes, even though it might seem a bit, you have to humble yourself. In some scenarios, it's like you are a baby in the face of, and I think like we see this reflected in reality. It's like people, especially because in that scenario, right, the baby is, in a sense, almost sometimes forced to watch the television show, like because the parent has to do a job, and right. The parent doesn't necessarily know that there's all the engineers behind that to make the baby show as addictive as possible, but it still is what is happening. The baby, you can't say like can even necessarily it prevents them from learning in this scenario, right? Learning that like right, and it's almost sort of like I see that if similar structures are made where it's like the people have to engage in like the equivalent of the addictive television show, basically, right? Whether they want to or not. And then by having to engage with that, that is made to be as like engineered by like so many other people, and it's really difficult to play against that. And then like the scenario becomes where it's like because also a lot of this is informational, right? And it's like the overloading of information. Some people, they can't even like learn to fish, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of disparate analogies and kind of maybe it's fallen apart, but
no, it's not falling apart.
I think that is kind of then for everybody, both individuals and groups, it's like the question comes to ask, how do we make it so then it is an environment that is conducive to teaching a man to fish, basically.
Yeah.
Where it's actually I don't even conducive. I think sometimes now it's where it's possible. Is even the question.
And this is the interesting part, and why. Of course, I agree with the general idea you said earlier. Like the material realities will, of course, inform our theories. However, it's not one answer. It's like one material reality does not give one answer, because of course you can think outside the box. In this case of the baby, for example, you may say, okay, how do we make sure that the baby is an environment where it is not exposed to these predators? Because that's what fundamentally they do, right? They prey on the baby's inability to cope with this manipulation tactic. So how do we do that? One way would be, okay, let's legislate against it, for example. That's what people in my previous career would think about. It's like, okay, we are politicians, that's what we do, let's legislate. But I'm like, okay, why not think of an alternative? Why is the baby even glued to the TV all day? Why isn't there a grandparent around, for example? Why aren't there
Oh yeah.
cousins around? Why isn't there a football pitch for them to go play some football, for example? Like, why aren't there alternatives to the television? Why is a parent forced to work all day, of course, and delegate the upbringing of the child to effectively strangers, whether it is the TV or nannies or whatever, right? So you can, what I'm basically saying, I'm not trying to answer, but what I'm basically saying is, of course, we can think of it in terms of a good and a bad kind of actor, and let's try to mitigate the bad actor's deeds. Another way to think of it is, well, let's change the terms of the relationship. Let's completely change the dynamic here. And let's try to set up different relationships where the virtuous outcome is embedded in the mechanics of that relationship. For example, in the case of the baby, if the baby is around, let's say, 10 other babies of the same age, children, let's not say babies, children of the same age, then of course these children, provided there is the right environment, they could go out and play outdoors where, okay, they will just be having fun with some ball or something.
Yeah, no, yeah. And for me, that is almost the concrete version of that still is like the concrete version of first laying the groundwork so the outcomes that are more sustainable to develop a good compass for the individual can actually be achieved, right? But I think that question is a question of like collective responsibility, so to speak, right? If that makes sense, right? Like, you know, it is true the baby actually is helpless in that scenario, right? Basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And the goal is to make the baby not helpless, basically, like over time, obviously. But that is kind of the conception that I have of what is going on, at least in that scenario, right? Yeah.
Very good, very good. Let's switch gears a little bit. Very interesting discussion thus far. But tell me a little bit about your outlook in terms of, well, what are you going to do with life? What are you thinking about? Maybe job prospects, or what you want to specialize on, what you would rather avoid, what are your values, what are your preferences, that sort of thing. Give me like an idea of where you are heading towards, if anywhere. Because of course there is the chance that you're not going somewhere in particular.
Yeah, so with me, like sort of how I said, even something like buying a car or that desire, it's like the actual content, which I mean like the car and stuff like that, is not necessarily what I think is always relevant. And in the same way of how, what was the other thing I said? I don't remember right now, so I'm just going to say that one.
You said another one with going and buying some cheese because you want to eat cheese, for example. That's another example you used.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking of. I think of... But anyway, it's not really important. But yeah, this kind of relates to my idea that I think that we can honestly say to ourselves, like, oh, I am passionate about fishing, and I wouldn't be passionate about anything else because I'm passionate about fishing or something like that. And I think like sometimes that is true, but I think in general, actually, it is like, I'm not saying that the fishing guy can go and instantly be as passionate about bowling or something, or studying philosophy or something. But I think that people are naturally predisposed to be passionate in some areas. But I think that in general, what makes something possible to be passionate about is often more structural to that activity and the individual's relationship to it, how they do it, basically, and how that kind of interacts with who they are, basically. So for me, it's like, even though I like programming, there is some programming job that I think would be a nightmare. Whereas it's something that even like I'm totally so indifferent to. I admit, I think there could be a situation where, as a job or even as something else, like kind of just a task, even, it can be like very like I could be very content with it, right? So for me, I think like it is a hard necessity that we have to sort of say like, oh, I'm a specialist in this and whatever, but at least because I'm young in the early stage of my life, I'm more kind of like looking out for where there is this form of doing things rather than necessarily the thing in itself. Even though I like to enjoy things in themselves, I guess. I guess this has been very vague, but in general, I think I would not like, and I hear that other people don't really survive very long to do like software work for like Google or something like this. But for me, I kind of prefer like I sort of like know most of the people in the company or whatever. So yeah, I mean, in some senses, I mean, I would, but I do very much enjoy programming and mostly just like the very, I guess, old-fashioned programming, like procedural programming in C++. I mean, I use other sort of paradigms or whatever you want to say, but and if that, I mean, I know that I think here those industries are can be a bit difficult to get into nowadays. So I'm not really like, I'm not really so like, my inner state isn't so caught up on whether I actually get into that or not. I know I can be content doing many actual things. It's more about the structure of the environment that facilitates the actual job. I think that many people, it's like having a bad boss is much more determining of whether their time is going to be okay at work, at least compared to the task, even, you know.
I think that's a very good point. Like the whole structural point you made. Like I think that's key because fundamentally there may be something you enjoy. Let's say programming. You fire up your computer and you write some code and you enjoy that. But then doing that in the context of a company where things are really stressful, your boss is abusive and he's calling you names or whatnot, you won't like programming anymore.
Yeah, and I think that it is because I like the. Yeah, and I think it is because I like the things in themselves, because I like the programming, that it's important for me to be conscious of this. Because it would be very bad. It would be like a double tragedy, I guess, if I did kind of enter that situation. And then afterwards, I think some people think, oh, I hate programming.
Correct.
And it's not that they do. It's because, yeah. Yeah, that would be so bad in my eyes. And I mean, I think it has happened to people. But yeah, so, you know, I'm young, I'm still in college, so I'm not really sure how exactly this works. I mean, the one thing I will say is that I think that programming is one of the first jobs I saw that there is almost like there's almost like a almost industry in sort of this like capitalizing off the imposter syndrome of programmers. That was and now it is happening to other careers, but it was one of the most prominent and one of the first ones I ever saw where I wasn't even thinking of being a programmer, and I saw that other people were watching videos that is like, if you don't do these things, you are not a real programmer. And it's like, if there was videos about this for like, I mean, now there are actually, but if there was videos or books like this for like plumbers or something, like this would seem almost comical. It's like, if you do plumbing, you're a plumber, right? And of course there's good plumbers and bad plumbers, but like this sort of like that there's actual like constructed media to basically be like this for programmers, I found a bit like ridiculous, right?
Because it's the nature of the job, which is a knowledge work. You know, there is this term nowadays, knowledge work.
Yeah.
So
I think you talked about this, yeah.
Yeah, and of course it's about programming, and it's about scientists doing lab work and so on, and of course academics and all of that. The key trap here is that you read the book, right? So in a sense, you know more. But what the book has done is it has made you aware of how much more you don't know. So by opening that corridor, it has revealed an entire vista of unknown possibilities and of areas you haven't visited, kind of thing. Like you climb up the mountain and you see an entire continent and you're like, oh my goodness, look at that. And of course, that is the nature of knowledge work, where because there is always more to learn, in the process of learning, you understand how much you still need to learn. And I see that with senior programmers, senior engineers as well, where it's like, well, I am a senior engineer, so of course I can do a lot. But then I have to go and learn what are all these new technologies, and then this and that, and the specific way of doing things, and using that component, and doing things this way, because now that is what the market is doing, etc., etc. So you are always playing catch up in a sense. And if you allow that to reflect on your self-esteem or your self-image, then of course you will always be feeling downtrodden and always be feeling like you are faking the whole thing.
Yeah. In general, I'm a pretty open-minded person, but I think this was like something I sensed, even not like experiencing directly. And to be honest, yeah, I was a little bit not like I'm actually afraid, but like scared of, right? Like I don't really want to be in a situation where it's like every day coming to work, it's like, oh, you are forced to like really learn something new, and whether it is, because it's not always more efficient, whether it is more or less efficient, you have to sort of do it. In general, I like to sort of like learn things more, have time to brew in the sort of like first principles of the thing, and then from there kind of whatever, where it's like, yeah, now a lot of people through no fault of their own, they're forced to kind of like start off with, I think, like learning these Amazon web development technologies or something, and then like there's all these like frameworks. I don't know. I honestly know. I think I'm very like proud of those people. I guess I have no idea how you kind of do it like that. For me, it was like if I didn't kind of start off with like, oh, these are how binary works, and then this is how like you could make a simple hello world. I would have never. I would have just been like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do any of this.
And of course, when you have this tendency to seek depth, to try to understand things from the ground up, even if it's in relative terms, the ground up, that is even worse once you enter an industry that works at a high pace. Because really, you don't have the luxury to learn things inside out the way you would like to. And I think what happens is you feel disempowered. Because you feel like you are not participating in the making of the tools, but you are just observing it and sort of faking it as it goes.
Yeah, and I think that but I don't want to be like close to like you know, like denying all, like doing anything before I've even begun. For me, it is just like where it's kind of on that level where I kind of end up is where it happens. I mean, I don't even mind doing like manual labor or something like that.
The thing is that you always learn. The thing is that whatever you do, and this includes the so-called bad things, whatever happens to you, if you have an attitude towards it where it's like, well, what can I learn from this? how can I improve given this situation? I think if you have that attitude, ultimately you are resilient. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Like if there is a bad boss, well, you learn what to look in a person so that you avoid that kind of person, for example. Like you
Yeah,
search for
exactly.
the cues, the red flags, as we say.
Yeah.
But it does happen through
Yeah, yeah.
experience. So it's not like, oh, I will read all the books about uh, boss making or whatever, bossing, and now I will know
Yeah.
what to look for. No, that doesn't work. Like you just have to
Yeah.
experience, and through experience have that attitude where it's like, okay, I'm learning as I'm going, and one step at a time.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I'm also inspired even by what you do. Like, I've always been, I think, like, I can admit to myself that life becoming too complicated, it sort of becomes too messy for me. And to be able to actually learn and stuff like this, I kind of need things to be, um, at least in an artificial sense, sort of, all that complication is outside of my world a little bit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I can just like kind of take in pieces at a time.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
can you actually tell me how, if you don't mind, how you kind of uh, started with the hut kind of prospect? Because I think like maybe the laws here is like different. Yeah, but I was interested very much in that.
So of course the legal side of things is covered, so it's all legal what I've done. But
Yeah.
that ultimately doesn't speak to the attitude. For me, what kind of forced me to go down this path is the situation, where it's like there is no good option for me. So instead of trying to escape, I will go all in. What's the thing when you are in a hole, you just keep digging, kind of thing. So you end up the other side. So it was like, okay, I will commit to this and see how it goes. And I don't know the outcome, but what I do know is that I will try in earnest. And this also goes to the point of what you were saying earlier, where the structure, if the structure is such. So, for example, me, I'm not exactly thrilled to do manual labor, for example. But the manual labor I do here, I do it with enthusiasm. I like it because I know that I am effectively building my world here. It's like Minecraft in real life, like literally, like dig into mountains, like do stuff. And I live in it. So for me, it's like, well, I have to do it with enthusiasm because it's a way of taking care of myself. And it's a way of building capacity to cope with evolving states of affairs. But it's not, just to say, it's not though that in a vacuum, I was just sitting there, it was a peaceful life, and I was like, well, what could I do to disturb this quietude? It wasn't really like that. It was like, well, things
Yeah, I know, I
were
understand.
tough, and yeah, I just had to rise to the occasion.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
just to say, another
Uh,
point, which is also a commentary on a theme we were discussing earlier, which is the situation many times forces your hand. And of course, in a vacuum, that might sound like a bad thing, but many times I have come to appreciate it as a good thing. Because if we have the luxury of not committing, we then fall into the trap of overthinking, over-analyzing, and
yeah.
over-strategizing, and, well, what if this, what if that? I could be doing that instead. There is also this other possibility. And of course, if you think about it, there are infinite possibilities. You could be anything, anywhere, for whatever. But the world is pushing you in a certain way, and you just have to work with that. And I think that's ultimately good.
Yeah. Specifically, did you, when you were building a hut, did you live somewhere? You live in the hut full time now, right?
Yeah. Now this is where I am. So my room is here. So I'm right outside now.
Yeah.
Because actually, before our meeting, I was doing some construction work. That's why I am out here. So It's it's a work in progress.
That's cool. That's cool. Did you how did it work? Like, where did you live before the hut was finished building and you could live full time?
So I used to rent a place a few kilometers away from here, and while I was building this, I would walk back and forth and do work here, and then go back and then come back, that sort of thing.
Did you like a vehicle that you could drive between, or did you just
No,
walk?
no, it's on foot. So of course I cover long distances in general, but it's like 5 kilometers, something like that. It wasn't that far away. So 5 kilometers for me, that's about 35 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, you definitely more faster than I do, I think.
You
Did
get
you
used to it.
did yeah, did you so you probably had to be pretty logistical about like
hmm
transporting the materials, like
yeah.
especially 'cause it's on foot. You
I
have to like
didn't
think about
transport the
that.
materials myself on foot, so I
Oh, okay.
arranged for
Yeah.
others to deliver them here. And this is kind of the point I have made before, where it's like, of course, it's easy to tell a story and be like, "Oh, I'm such a badass. I just did everything myself."
Yeah.
Right? Which of course is not true. Come on. I had arranged with people to for them to deliver the materials here, and of course, I think what in hindsight now, I think what people saw is my determination, where it was like, look, I'm not messing around. This is exactly what I want. Will you help me? Yes or no? And I think they could sense my determination, and they understood that I really mean what I say, and of course that's why they were willing to help. And I had a lot of people around here who would give me materials that they had, surplus materials. Like one day, this was amazing, and it inspired an article that I wrote. I was in my room, so there is the window to the room, and I was sitting there, and I was doing a video call. And there is a neighbor, of course they don't live near here, but further up the mountain. So a neighbor, and he drives by, drives into the land here, gets off the car, comes to the window and is like, "Hey neighbor, I brought you some sheets of metal that you could use to patch the roof." And I'm like, "That's amazing." And I
Yeah,
wrote
that
an
is amazing.
article at the time about, I forget exactly how it's called, but I think it's called Eponymity and Community, where basically the idea is this. If you want to be anonymous in the very strict sense of anonymous, therefore private, you won't have a community. To have a community, you kind of have to have a name, you kind of have to have a face so that people can trust you. In other words, the gate has to be open, your neighbor has to be able to come in, walk to your window, look into the house, and then they trust you. And then, of course, they bring you the stuff. And for me, it was like this. I benefited from all these little contributions from all sorts of people. And eventually, through my work, this happened.
That's great. Yeah. Did you also have to do like the electrical work?
No, the electrical work was done by a friend of mine who is an electrician. That's actually the only thing I never touched. Other than, of course, do the setup for the solar panels, but not the wiring. So I did the whole thing to set up the skeleton on which the solar panels are installed, and I actually installed the panels as well, but I didn't do any wiring, nothing. That thing is scary.
Yeah, it definitely is, right? Yeah. Yeah.
A friend told me the good thing with the electricity related work is that you know when you've messed up. Things will explode.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. It's very interesting. So, okay. Do you want to move on to another topic, or?
Yeah. So tell me, what do you want? Because you were telling me about writing and note taking. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that as well. And also, I want to learn a little bit more about your fiction. Like, what does that entail? Like, what do we mean you write fiction? Like, tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I wrote. I mostly write like fiction novels and then also sometimes screenplays, right? There was actually a time I was thinking about doing a screenplay as even a career, but that is very like, I don't know, I would still enjoy that, but it's very like, precarious, right? So with my novels, I mostly just do, I mean, I guess it can be put in the fantasy genre, but I find that mine is less, it's more similar to the real world. Not even in, so there's one classification of fantasy is called the low fantasy, and then these are often or there's often some that are just like, it is the real world, but there is like demons or something, right? Mine is not similar in that sense. It's more similar as in, I think that I involve more like serious real world kind of things. Like there is like big giant monsters and stuff like that. So in that sense, there's a lot of people who have magic powers and whatever, but there is like a lot of like politics and stuff like this. So I mean, a lot of people dismiss sort of the fantasy genre, that it's like, but there's a lot of works that is like very, I think, very like serious, and I'm impressed by the commitment of some of these writers, that they have spent hundreds of thousands of hours on, probably even hundreds of thousands of hours on some of their writings. I of course like have other things to do. I don't have that time, but so I kind of have one main series that I work on for that, and then the scripts I can just do every once in a while, and those are more usually based on a real world kind of drama, I guess, or something like this. And I with my writing, I'm not, especially the fantasy one, I'm not so like I construct everything to be like, here's the lesson, here's the themes, here's the exact thing beforehand. I do a lot more like it's like unplanned kind of writing and stuff like that. But there is like a big kind of overarching conflicts and stuff like that. And I do try to put a lot of things that I experience or know in that writing.
And how does that work?
Yeah.
Like, do you have like a lesson you want to teach, and you work out the story from there, or you have an idea of a plot and the lesson kind of emerges through there? How does that work? Or maybe...
Yeah, so I think for me, I do kind of adhere to the classical sort of idea, or maybe not classical, but like, I guess it's like classically modern in that like it's like the mainstream idea now, right? Of like the conflict is the first thing to like the thing I actually structure kind of beforehand, and then like the plot, it revolves around the conflict, and the story kind of arc is around the plot. And then I think from the characters must be determined to set up that conflict, and then the characters, they usually just pop into my mind, but then they kind of is like how the sort of philosophical lessons are explored. And sometimes even they're like very wild, like fantastical characters, but they explore something I think is very fundamental. Like, for example, maybe to make things more concrete, one of the main villains of the novel is like, it's like the kind of background of it is that this is not like the real world, right? But in their world, 1,000 years ago, all these people at the same time, they got like very powerful magic powers. And before that, the people, or it was like humanity, but it was very much like the Hobbesian world of it's like cruel short-lived lives in nature, and especially so because humanity like was actually decently technologically developed, but the animals have magical powers and they're predators, right? And some of them are big and stuff, so it's like not very fun when a big giant magic monster tries to destroy your city or something. But all at once, all these humans around the world, some of them got it. There wasn't that many people, but they were powerful enough, and they were also immortal. So they became like the vanguard of humanity or whatever against the monsters. But then they have disagreements between them, and then they all fight and stuff like that, right? It's a very like kind of normal myth story, right? But it actually happened in their reality, right? But then at the end of their battle, when like most of them are dead, one of them says they fear that one of them has a magic power. He was like the bad one, I guess, even though it's like written after history, right? But they fear he's going. The ones on the victorious side fear that he can use his magic powers to come back to life, basically, and that he was the most powerful one. So it's going to be a big bad show. So then one of them says, well, we're already respected almost like gods, right? Because there was primitive religion, so they understand how like that kind of works. But we're almost respected like gods in our world. So I'm going to make an organized religion to develop society in the way I want, so that society has these myths. So basically, when this guy comes back, he'll be like the Antichrist. Basically, is the idea. But he's not even sure that that guy will come back, but he thinks like, I'm going to build a society. So obviously there's some themes that are related to like, the Christian churches, the Catholic Church, but even though they are a pantheon or a non I'm tripping over my words here, but there's multiple gods. Yeah, polytheistic, sorry, yeah. They're a polytheistic society. The organization. So he is like, but part of this is there's almost a satirical element where people, I think nowadays, because of the narrativization, we're told like there is some Illuminati who controls all the governments and stuff like that. And then basically there's almost like a hidden satirical element that the only way this would be possible is if there was some like guy who has magic powers and can live forever, right? And then he was literally in this story, there are some of these gods and they have magic powers and they live forever, and that's how they control. But it's sort of like a dual thing where it's like, in a way it's satirical, right? Because it's like, oh, the only way this could happen is if this kind of guy existed. But also he does use real strategies that, yes, special interest groups that are powerful use to control society and religion and stuff like this. And he's like, I guess they're the two main bad guys. The guy who invented the religion and the religious institution to control the society. And then the guy who is going, he does come back, actually. The guy is right, he uses, and it's also sort of the debate, the ethical debate is that guy that comes back to life, he is like a bad guy, or we would think he's a bad guy. But was the other guy right? Because he does a lot of things that you would say is very unethical to construct this, and he's lying to all the people. He did change the story, right, of what really happened. He made a narrative, exactly. Is he right to make this institution? Because yes, when that guy comes back, he's going to kill a lot of people. But is he still right to, like, it's like the noble lie kind of idea, but kind of synthesized, right? Like he made this whole authoritarian structure to control society, and there's even bad things he do. One of them is I'll just name the bad guy. The bad guy who is going to come back to life. His name is Tregale. His powers. He's the most powerful version of one of the 5 main magic powers that the humans have.
the dark power. So it only works when things are in the darkness, basically. So like they can only use it if it's at nighttime or in the shadows or whatever. But he can basically because he's the most powerful one. All the original ones that are immortal are the most powerful. But one of their powers is they can control people's minds in the dark. But he can control all the other dark people's minds and basically compound his powers, and that's why he's so powerful. Like, to put it simply, right? So to prevent this from happening in society later, the other god who invented the religion, his name is Revictus, he made one of the tenets that basically the dark people are like witches and demons. So when they discover that one of their children is a dark one, they kill them. They burn them alive. Like, so this is like a real element in history, but there's actually a reason for it, right? But it's like, this is obviously terrible, right? Killing children is like the worst thing you can think of, one of the worst things. But he did it for a legitimate reason. Is it okay? Or is it not, right? And then even the Trigali, he's not supposed to be like unadulteratedly evil. He is more like kind of represents that kind of it's both kind of like in the Nietzschean ideals and then the like our perspective of evolution, right? So even though sort of 1,000 years ago on first principles, because those guys were immortal and they had powers, they also became better at science, right? Like some of them can fly around, right? And then you imagine like if before that time, that would be very useful to get a lot of scientific data you can't otherwise get. And because they could live forever, some of them that were more interested in science, they basically become like Aristotle, right? It's like, you can record all the animals and stuff like that. So he kind of, even though they didn't discover it really scientifically, on first principles, he deduces a more modern conception of like both like Darwinian evolution and this kind of stuff and how life comes about. He doesn't know everything, but because he kind of focuses on these ideas, he is like, he's like a very like modern villain, I think, because his like kind of idea is even though he is dead, he can kind of see the world using his powers, kind of like the Eye of Sauron or whatever. But he says, Revictus has tried to make humanity like the sort of like end of history idea. And it's like, he basically says humanity as its whole is selfish, because what we see is that as the universe develops, right, it's like more complicated beings get formed, right? Like you see this as in planets are made of more complicated things than like just the nitrogen floating around, and that makes plants which are more complicated, and then animals come and eat plants and they're more complicated. And right now, but he basically says right now it's humans, we are the apex, right? Like, we have consciousness, we have this stuff, but in a sort of like stupid way, we try to cut off the line at ourselves. So we stop evolution of the universe, basically, right? Because we just want to be like happy, or like we just want like, or we're scared as the other, right? So he wants to stop this. And he thought that them getting the magic powers is basically like a wake-up call. And there actually was an alien that gave them the magic powers, but that's not really important. They don't know, they never find out about the alien. But he basically said, the alien sent a telegram. I mean, yeah, it's very fantastical, right? But it touches to real themes. That the telegram said, like, basically, they had to translate it, right? It wasn't in whatever, but he thought the translation says basically, simply, it's like a short one, but it came with other like things that helped him translate it. He thought the translation says, "Who are you?" And he thought the alien asked humanity like in a sort of mocking way, like, "Who are you? Like, you have developed consciousness. Who are you? Like, what are you going to do with it?" And he basically, over the 1,000 years, thought, and it was longer than that, but he thought like, like we've been given, like the alien is saying to us, and we're kind of showing that we're short-sighted to believe that because we have consciousness, we can cut off everything and just become comfortable and like not evolve anymore, basically, or evolve in a way that like stops evolution, basically. So he's not like a straw man social Darwinist where he's like, oh, the strong survivor or whatever, but he's very much like, he thinks that the powers and stuff and the magic monsters and stuff can be used to affect humanity's like biological form and consciousness to evolve. But he is immoral, and like we would think he's immoral, but it's kind of this negotiation between like morality and stability, or our ethics and like stability, and then his idea of like pushing humanity forward, right, to become something else.
The drive, as it were, of evolution.
And there's like all sorts of weird stuff. I mean, I don't even come up with it randomly. Like one time I was like, okay, so the dark powers, it's like the powers themselves are just powers, right? But because these gods were influential, and because the powers naturally kind of relate to certain topics, there's like almost like philosophies that are created around the powers, right? So the dark one, there's 3 variations of that one, but they affect mostly the mental space. So one of them is a creation dimension, and they can like, if there's an area of shadow, they can make like little animals or something from their own imagination that they invented beforehand. So that and then one of them is they can touch you, and they can like make you, if they either touch you because touching someone, it's like a shadow is created, right? So you can always touch you, right? But or if there's a lot of darkness, they can make you like they can control your senses, basically. So they make you see things that you don't actually see or stuff like that. And then the last one is, they're actually kind of similar because but one of them is affecting directly your brain, like it's making a brain illusion. So they're also used ironically as like cell phones, because they can like put a thought in your mind over a long distance. They use like a crystal that transports the darkness. I don't know, it's like kind of complicated. But the other ones, if there's a dark area, like a shadow on the wall, they can change the wall to look like any mirage, right? But all of these are still about like perception, the mind, and whatever. So a philosophy of the darkness one has kind of developed where they are very much, and they're very much like the a priori, like mind over matter, like pure idealism kind of philosophy, which kind of makes sense because they see that, what we make people see as a trick of the mind is more real than matter itself. And the creation ones, we create them a priori, like they have to invent the animals beforehand in this kind of like mind space, and then they put it into reality. So this philosophy kind of developed of this magic power, I guess. And then I thought of all that together, and I was like, okay, I want to make more of the magical beasts, they're called, that are the non-human ones, and they kind of have variations of the human powers. So I thought, but why don't we have one that's a plant, right, for once? And then this one, it grows out of the ground like a real plant, but I wanted this one to interact with the humans more. So then this plant, when the roots spread, it is like the darkness, but the roots make like these little like new like offshoots of the plant, and then in any of the areas that they cast in the shadow, these new offshoots, the people can touch the plant and communicate with the plant, and it works like a hive mind. So then humans, we can become like a collective consciousness, sort of. So there's one, they're like a tribe, but I it's very common that we have the collective consciousness as like these like good hippie guys or whatever. But I was like, I kind of want to make them in between. I don't want to make them like the Borg, so they're all mindless. But I also don't want to make them good hippie guys. So they're actually mostly like a Mongol horde. and they want to spread the plant and take over all the other civilizations because they think the collective life is the best. But they're not just like purely without individuality too. It's like very much the plant kind of sort of knows, or at least has all the memories of all the people, but it knows like who put the memory in. So it's like they don't really lose their individuality, but they are almost more effective in a way because it's like, you know, they almost have like a proto version of the internet. Like I can see my my grandma's memories. I can see all the people in my village's memories just by touching the tree. So this kind of, anyway, like, you know, like, yeah, I have fun with all these ideas, and it's very whatever.
Do you publish any of this, by the way? Oh, so just to say, I will need to go soon because the electricity will run out.
Okay.
It's also getting dark, so. But do you publish any? Maybe we can close on this point here.
Not yet. This one is like, sort of my mega work, right? And it has all this stuff. All the fantasy ideas are in this kind of book. Which is like a series. It's very long, and
do you plan to publish it? Is that part of?
I do plan to publish this one, and then for my scripts, it's sort of like with scripts. It's like there's not really a point in publishing it. It's like if I want to, like, do it as a career or want to whatever, I have to find, like, you know, an agent, or like if it's a low budget one, someone to film it and stuff like that. I don't really care about filming things myself. It's very, like, I just find it very, like, stressful to organize all the actors. I have done it before, but this one, but this is more like something, I will publish this maybe when I'm like 35 or something. The whole series at the same time. But yeah, no, I very much enjoy making these, this book. And for me, yeah, it is about the most fundamental sort of ideas of reality and that we have had in humanity and stuff.
No, that's fascinating. Well, if you have like a blog at least where you could, I don't know, provide the snippets or hints or whatever, or what you are working on, I think that would be interesting, because what you described here sounds fascinating. And at least from my perspective, it's fascinating, not because it's an interesting story, but because fundamentally the story gives us the grist to the mill of more stories. Like, we can say so many things about what you mentioned here.
Yeah. I mean, I think writing is like difficult, especially when it's like because you can make it as long as you want, as short as you want, and like it is like an infinite possibilities kind of scenario, but within one activity. Especially this like fiction writing, right? So for me, it's like sometimes I do get a little like, because I describe these ideas to you here, but they don't really appear that way in the story. Just like you hear the vacuum of the whatever. It's like they are present over the long narrative, and there's like it's from a perspective of a couple guys and whatever, right? So. Sometimes it's like, for me, the difficult part is negotiating, kind of telling the story itself, which is like slow paced and whatever, and then like putting the ideas in a way that actually still connects to the ideas that they are, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah. That makes sense, of course. Because that's how a story is. You cannot just say, okay, this is a story in 2 pages and, you know, game over. You have to tease it out.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's fun. I mean, I wish I had more time to work on that. I have a lot of different interests. And then, I also have to, you know, like we got to do what we got to do, right? At the same time, too, right? So.
Of course. And the thing is that, like with this book, for example, there are infinite possibilities. Sure, but maybe it's also good to just say, you know what, I will publish this in, let's say, 2 years, and then move on to something else. Because then, of course, if you keep working on something, well, infinite possibilities also mean that it's never done.
Yeah. No, I do have a very concrete plan of what this book is. Like, it's like a 3 series. I basically know like almost everything. It's just like writing out the details and then like editing the book. So like, you know, it is like, yeah, like there are like editing like sort of guidelines of like what makes an actual enjoyable story to read. That is not necessarily the same as like what is just fun to write for the individual, right? So that's like kind of the second aspect of the process, right?
Yeah. Very well, very well. I say let's call it a day because it's getting dark and I hear my inverter beeping.
No, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It's
some interesting stuff.
It's been very fun.
Nice, I enjoyed it. So you can send me any links you have, and I will include them in the description of the video. And I will close.
I don't
stop the recording.
Okay, cool.
Very well, very well. So take care, Logan, and good luck with everything. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So
can you close the recording, and then can I just ask you one thing?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I will stop the recording then, and then you can ask me. Let me stop the recording, and let me confirm that I stopped.